Next up, we have Arnie Prentice to introduce our main speaker. Arnie is co-chair of Kibble and Prentice. Arnie?
While many have influenced Washington's wine industry, no one has cast a longer shadow than Allen Shoup. Please welcome Allen.
Thank you, Arnie. I've become very close friends with Arnie. He, as may be evident, he invested in Long Shadows, and I quickly put him on the board, and in the process of getting to know him, I've become a very big cheerleader for the man and a great friend. Arnie's the kind of person who not only gets the big picture, but he sees the little opportunities and the little details, and I think it has a lot to do with the success that he's had in life. I want to quickly congratulate Jim on his new position. Jim and his wife and his parents have all lived in the same community that I've lived in for the last 20 years, and so it's a small community, and we all feel like family there, so I'm pretty proud to be associated with all of their accomplishments, if in no other way other than by watching. And Mark, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I don't know if it's just the luck of the draw or what, but I see that I'm following Steve Ballmer. No problem. I wore a tie. I brought some gifts. You know, I'm prepared. But well, I just want to say one. Just between us, don't you think he planted that question? We all do things like this, you know. I had to pay Arnie, because of his attention to little opportunities, I had to pay him for the various adjectives that he used in my speech, but he wouldn't let me buy the big ones. His integrity wouldn't let me pay for some of those. But in any case, I'm going to take a different approach than I've ever taken before in talking about the Washington wine industry. We're going to go back 20,000 years. It was the last great ice age. And one of the most dramatic events that has ever happened in recorded history actually happened in the northwest corner, or the northeast corner of our state, right between Spokane and Missoula, Montana. There was a huge dam there. Dam was made of ice. It was a glacier dam. And it blocked up the North Fork River and created what was called Glacial Lake Missoula. This dam became so big, and this lake grew over time. It became over 2,000 feet deep, and the lake actually moved all the way out to the Continental Divide. And then one day, the dam burst, and it was a cataclysmic event. It's believed to be the world's greatest flood. It was certainly the greatest flood ever in continental North America. Picture this gigantic glacial mass blowing away in an instant 500 cubic miles of water, and boulders and glaciers within this mass of water, some of them quarter mile, we believe, in diameter, traveling at 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. A quarter mile in diameter, visualize that. That would be like the Columbia Tower, twice as high as it is, and the same distance wide, turned into this one solid mass, and thousands of those moving at a rate of twice the speed of a freight train, being pushed by this mass of water. The water alone, as we know, the kind of force that would be in this water and the damage alone, but then to have these gigantic hard objects, going through them, it literally altered the landscape of eastern Washington forever. It stripped everything in its path. I mean, everything, the forests, the trees, all the soil, stripped it. It took huge cliffs and plateaus and mowed them down to barren bedrock. Just obliterated everything in its path. And eventually, as it tore through and spread, it reached the area which we now is the border eventually of Washington and Oregon. And because of the much higher land there, it paused, and as all water, it is always seeking sea level, and there was a small gap that it forced its way through. The gap was, if you follow the Columbia River from the Tri-Cities to the point where it becomes and butts against the Oregon border, the river at that point is flowing south through coming down from the center of the state, and then it makes an abrupt turn to the west. And that turn is what we call the Wallula Gap, and that's the gap the river stopped at. When it stopped at that gap, didn't stop, but as it slowed the flow, it created for a few days, we believe, we don't know how long, but certainly very, very little time, it created a giant lake that is referred to now as Lake Lewis. And this lake was over 800 feet deep, and it was believed to be about 3,000 square miles wide. So in those few days, as that lake existed, it had enough time to have huge, massive amount of alluvial deposit drop through. Now, we know this flood happened, we believe, at least 40 and probably about 100 times over a couple hundred-year period. And that alluvial material and that flattened area basically laid the foundation for what we call today the Columbia Valley, the home of the Washington wine industry. The Columbia Valley includes both the Yakima Valley, the Horseheaven Hills, Walla Walla. All of those are under the umbrella of the Columbia Valley. The name of Columbia Valley didn't exist. I actually had the opportunity to pick that name when I first came here. We called our wines Washington wines. It's one of the greatest liabilities we had then and have today, because Washington, to all but the few people that live in this part of the world, means something completely different than the state of Washington, and not something that's normally associated with fine wine. Although we still do get people, after showing maps and making presentations, asking questions afterwards as to which side of the Potomac we're on. And that's a true story. It turns out that that area there has always been called the Columbia Basin. But and you can't just pick any name for a viticultural region, but we found that when Lewis and Clark came out and they saw this huge area, the area is so big that you can see it from a satellite, or from space basically, any part, because it has no indigenous life. There's no trees. It's barren. And when they saw this, they drew, and if you look at the maps they drew of the Pacific Northwest, you'll see this huge area, and they called it the Columbia Valley. And so that gave us the precedence to use that name for our viticultural region. The single most dramatic example that I can think of the Columbia Valley is a vineyard that I and others, Arnie being one of them, recently invested in, and it sits right on the cliffs of the Wallula Gap, right where it turns. Right after it turns, we sit on these 1,400 feet cliffs, and we've planted the vineyard from the top of the cliff all the way down to the water. And it looks like rice paddies. We cover the top and bring it all the way down, successive steps or benches, and plant each of the benches. And it's something you can see it on Google, or if you like, ask us, and we'd love to show it to you and bring you there, particularly if you're interested. We're inviting people to invest in small lots of vineyards there, particularly if they're interested in drilling caves into the basalt and put it in wineries. That's our vision for the future of this area. But it is very, very dramatic, and we've had people from all over the world see it. And it's unique to the world, but in Washington we have many other examples of vineyards. I don't think anything quite as dramatic as this one. The person who first came up with this concept of this cataclysmic flood that caused the unique features of the Columbia Valley was a man named Harlan Bretz. He was from the University of Chicago. He came up with the idea in about 1920, and he was a very, very prominent geologist. But instantly, as he started promoting this idea, it was heresy, and he was humiliated by the other leading geologists at the time. It's a fascinating story of what he had to go through and how he made these discoveries and how he finally got supported. And it was only until 1980, unfortunately, he was still alive, that he really received the most prestigious award that you can be given in the whole area of his science. That he was, I think, 93 at the time, so he finally got the recognition that he deserved. If you read the book Cataclysm on the Columbia, written by Allen and Burns, it will tell you this story. So now you're asking, why am I here to talk about the future of the wine industry, and I'm back 20,000 years ago? And why would I be talking about the rejection of his theories as being relevant to what I'm going to talk to you about today? First of all, it's relevant for two reasons. One, the first reason is that the reason he wasn't accepted, his views weren't accepted, is because cataclysmic events weren't accepted in the whole field of archaeology and geology. And remember, there's people in this room that were born during the Scopes trial and the whole trial that Clarence Darrow defended Scopes on because he was teaching the whole idea of evolution. And that was around 1935, 1940, and he lost that trial. So the issues of creationism were the same thing, of cataclysmic disaster was seen at that time, and certainly by people still today, as being something that only God could do, and being consistent with the book of Genesis, that we could not have cataclysmic events, and it literally turned the way this science could be recognized. They would not accept it until just very recently. The relevance of that is that the wine industry in Washington is going through, in many ways, the same thing. Many of you have met the people who love wine, they study wine, they've invested a lot of money in wine, and they know a lot about wine. And they develop what I call wine religion. You meet them all the time. They know a lot, they love to talk about it, and they have lots of facts and very strong opinions. And common opinions would be things such as only great wines come from France, Burgundy makes the best champagnes, maybe it's Italy. If they're a little younger, their support might go to California, or if it does, probably more likely just Napa Valley. Washington has historically been very, very, in the 30 years that I've been involved, the Washingtonians have been very supportive in embracing Washington wines. But we embrace Washington wines in general like we embrace the Mariners. We like them, but we know that there's others that are better. And so it's difficult because wine is like religion. And so even here in Washington, people say that. They'll say, oh, Washington makes great wines. But of course, it's not, and then you can fill it in. It's not Burgundy or it's not Bordeaux. Like, of course, it can't be that good. The future of the Washington wine industry will have a one-to-one relationship with the industry's ability to alter the wine religion of the world. And we'll have to start right here in Washington because we haven't completely done it here. But it's a major, major obstacle. Wine is such a cherished subject, and people feel so fervent about those wines that they think are the best wines, that it's very, very difficult for us to really break through and convince people that not only are we as good, but we're often better, and we're still improving, but we're already competing with the best in the world. So can we do it? Can we change this world wine religion? Sure, we can, but after all, we are talking about strong convictions, and I believe it will take a lot of work and a lot more talent than actually I think that we're currently employing on this very issue. That's a whole other speech, but my concern today is that our industry is reading too many of our own press releases and the world isn't reading them. And we've become a little insular in our conviction of how good we are and don't realize that you don't have to go too far outside the border of Washington to find people who don't share this passion. There's exceptions, and there's a lot of exceptions, and we are doing a lot better than one would expect after the short amount of time we've been here. It's the world's most competitive consumer package. There's no exaggeration, there's no hyperbole in that statement. We're the world's most competitive by a factor of, I don't know how many, 50, 100. There's probably 500,000 different wine labels, each one competing to be on the Safeway shelf or the Canvas wine list. And the world doesn't need us, and they're not looking for us to come along. So we're really going to have to battle. The main reason that I started with my 200,000 years ago story is that we are special, and our story is based on fact. Quite simply, there is no other wine region in the world that shares the uniqueness of our creation and is capable of growing grapes as unique as what we can grow in the Columbia Valley. In the final analysis, wine can be only as good as the grapes that are grown. We know today that 80 to 90% of the quality of wine is predetermined by the vineyard. I've used a lot of religious analogies, and I'm going to use one more, and it's a pretty bold one, but I believe it totally, and I believe it's an accurate statement. If you were to play God today and create the world's most perfect growing region, it would be more like the Columbia Valley than any other wine region of the world. Now, that's a big statement. Now, wine is grown all over the world, too. Every state in the Union now, including Alaska, grows wine. But wine is easy to grow. You just bring the vines to the ground and you can grow grapes. They'll grow anywhere. But it's really difficult, and there's very, very few places that can grow great wine. There's some key words that we look at when we look for great wine. Key words that describe the growing region: sun, water, rain, humidity, heat, coolness, dormancy, disease, pest, and of course soils. We want optimal water. Well, thanks to the great rivers through the Columbia Valley, we use drip irrigation. And through drip irrigation and the technology of drip irrigation, we can absolutely, with soil probes and everything else, control the perfect amount of water that we want on those plants as determined by viticulturists and others. So some places can't do that, like Bordeaux and Burgundy, for marketing reasons. They simply don't allow it. Other places simply don't have the resources to do it. Rain's important not because you want it, as long as you have rivers and irrigation. Rain's important because you don't want it. You simply, if you have rain during bud break or rain during harvest, you're going to have problems. The rain's going to create, in bud break, it's going to destroy the blossoms. You're going to have uneven ripeness in your berry sets, and in harvest, you're going to have molds and funguses and many other problems there. Our two mountain ranges trap all the rain and the clouds, and so consequently, when you go over to eastern Washington during the summer, Not only do we not have rain, we don't even have clouds. So we have a perfect source of sun, and that gives us the next thing we want, which is heat. We have long, hot days. The word long is important because we like a long growing period. Envision a hothouse tomato. It looks like a tomato, it's rushed ripened, it doesn't smell like one, and it doesn't taste like one. We like things to grow for a long time to build their flavors, and so we like a long, warm growing season. We have a longer growing season here than even California because we get an hour a day more sunlight than they do, just simply because of the latitude we're on. Coincidentally, that 45 latitude is also the latitude that goes through Bordeaux and Burgundy. So we get a much more longer growing season, and with that, we get a lot more character in our fruits. Unique to us, and a lot to do with that great flood that leveled off the plains and created this kind of flat, high valley, high desert area, is we get the temperature conversions that exist almost nowhere else, where we can have easily a 95-degree day and still have a 65-degree night. The 65-degree nights are critical because they protect our acids and keep our wines crisp, even though they're building up all the sugars they need to be rich, wonderful wines. Our vines go dormant, and we believe and know that when roots go dormant, you actually get the rest, the plant rests, and that the flowers that grow in the same flowers that grow in northern versus summer areas will have far more fragrance intensity if they grow in the north. They seem to awaken with a greater vigor. It's almost the same effect as pruning. Diseases and pests are a big, big problem. And again, in eastern Washington, the weather, the lack of rain, the lack of many things that we have, is we have no serious pests and we have no serious diseases. Most important and most critical are the two that are now the one, which is called the grassy wing sharpshooter, which is a strange name for a disastrous beetle in California that lives off the orange blossoms, but has come into the vineyards and creates a disease in the grapes called Pierce disease, which literally destroys the vines and forces them to be replanted. Much more interesting is the fact that we have no phylloxera, one of the few in the world. And those of you who know much about wine know how the French and the European wine industry at the turn of the century was decimated when phylloxera, this root louse, attacked and was wiping out all the great vines of Europe, destroying this whole species which we depend on today to make the great wines in America. The survival of the vines in Europe was the wild rootstock of the different style grape that we have here in the United States. And we grafted the vines over there onto those rootstocks, and because the disease came from America in the first place, they were immune to it. So that rootstock is used almost all over the world today, including California and Oregon. We don't have phylloxera, so we grow on natural rootstock. A huge, huge advantage. And finally, soils. Those alluvial soils and then the loess soils, L-O-E-S-S, which is the windborne soils that are born from the granulated rock dust and everything else that cover our plains, are the absolute perfect soils for grapes. They drain easily. They lack high fertility, and we want low fertility when we grow grapes. The problem with high fertility in grapes is that we want all the energy. We want the roots to go very, very long into the soil, which they do in ours because of our deep, soft soils. They go a long way in and get lots of different mineral content and develop a much more complex, therefore, style of flavor. But moreover, the soils, because they're relatively infertile, we don't get big canopy growth, and you know, the worst place to plant a vine is in rich soil, because then you get a lot of leaves and a lot of growth, but that takes away the development. We want the vine to struggle and put all its time and energy and just taking care of the fruit. And that's what happens if it's with all plants, is if they have to struggle, they'll do everything they can to reproduce themselves, and they'll put their energy in the fruit. So that's what we're looking for, is for the grapes to be able to just have full time in energy going into producing fruit. I could go into a lot of other details and perhaps I'm already boring you with some of these technical things of what makes for great wine regions. But I go back to the statement. There is no place in the world that can list all of these critical variables, and I really don't believe there are any others, and in each instance have the unique advantages that we have, many of them created by that great flood. So it's a story that we, and only we have. It's a story that we need to do a better job of telling, and it's one that I think we haven't done as well. The future, our future is much like the future for every other economic issue we're dealing with today. Our future depends on what we do today. It's a very, very competitive world, and we need to be as aggressive as we can. There is a surplus of wine in the world. We have a unique story to tell. We have a unique capability of making great wines, but we can't take shortcuts. We have to do a better job of telling the story. We waste a lot of our money and our efforts in the States in things that have nothing to do with telling that story. We need to bring more experts into the state to take advantage of the kinds of people that we brought to Long Shadows and people that I brought to Chateau Saint Michel and Columbia Crest before that from around the world, because it's a great way to get our story permeated out. When these people of high acclaim come here and take the stories back, we need to see more of the world's wine leaders coming to Washington and investing in Washington. We need more and better research. That's a speech in itself. And finally, in case I've offended any of the people here about religion in terms of creationism, we need to pray for prosperity.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.